Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Celia from Celia Self Reflects. Let's get into today's story. So just as a quick disclaimer, these videos are stories of my experiences, my own views and opinions, my own learning and my own understanding of things that I've learned. I'm not an expert in these fields. The only thing I'm an expert is my experience of this world. And I'm just sharing these stories with you. So let's get into it. So today I want to start with just getting myself centered. All I'm going to do is going to breathe out, followed by just an inhale and an exhale through your nose. Feel free to join me. So just a breath out. In through the nose. And out. We're ready. Let's go. So for today's video I wanted to talk about my journey with inner child healing and how that's been actually a really great tool for me to understand a lot of my behaviors as an adult today. So I'd like to just give a quick shout out, or a huge shout out, to Dr Nicole LePera from The Holistic Psychologist. She has some fantastic resources online and on her Instagram, amazing YouTube videos that helped me significantly through this journey of learning about inner childhood healing. I'm going to pop her links down in the description below, as well as a couple of links to videos that explain this really nicely. From a professional standpoint, I think this is just my take on it, my understanding, which has helped me to get it. So as I said briefly, inner child healing for me has helped to understand patterns of behavior for me as an adult today. Now there's a few ways of doing this. The way that really worked for me is by looking into my childhood. And I started off with like 3. I was just pick 3 moments as a child that really stand out for you as changing your thought beliefs or triggering a certain thought belief that was then repeated over and over and over again. And later on in the video I'll share with you a couple of these for me. The other way Dr. Nicole LePera recommends is to look at current patterns or current behaviors in your life that you're not happy with and then try and work your way back. For me, I found the other way worked better, so I'm going to talk about that today. So in terms of identifying those moments in childhood that impact you greatly, often we think about trauma as like the big traumas. So neglect, abuse, those big traumas. Nicole LePera calls these the big T's. There's also a whole other range of little T's that only until recently have really started to become more known and aware of, but that these little T's can also have as big an impact as a big T on someone's life. So when we're talking about a little T, those little traumas, it's things that are described as simply an unmet need. So I'm going to put a link to a particular video. I think it's called Redefining Trauma, or a new definition of trauma, or something that Nicole LePera does. So beautifully outlines those little T's and just how prevalent and overlooked some of these little T's can be. So today I'm going to share with you a big T and a little t of my own, just as an example of how I identified them and then how I chose to cope with them and kind of redefine them for myself. So for my big T, let's get this one out of the way. Quite simply, it was just my parents separating. I was extremely young. I was only 3 years old when they separated. But I distinctly remember having this feeling of responsibility to my family. I truly had this thought and had made it this decision as a scared 3-year-old child that I had broken my family and therefore I didn't deserve happiness. I didn't deserve to have things I wanted. I didn't deserve to be happy. And it was my job and my role in the family now to look after everyone else. Interestingly, as a little bit of a side note to that, I found out much later in life that the week that I was born, there was a huge conflict in the house between my mum and dad. I'm not going to get into details in regards to what that was, but I can now look at it from a different perspective where for my older brother and sister, who would have been 5 and 3 when I was born, for these little children, I can see how they would have connected that I came into the world and then mum and dad weren't okay. So for a lot of my childhood, I do recall my brother and sister blaming me for my father leaving. So it was always very much, it's your fault that Dad left, and if you didn't come along, Dad would still be here, and those sorts of things. I don't have any blame towards my brother and sister in regards to this situation anymore, because with this understanding of this event that occurred that the week that I was born, and how from a family dynamic perspective it would have completely altered that family dynamic, and how two scared little kids can put together the fact that when I came along, the family dynamic was different and it was bad. So just, that was a really interesting thing I learned later in life that really clarified a lot of things for me around where that belief came from, like why did my brother and sister blame me and things like that. So that was really interesting to identify and to learn. Now, I talk about these things very plainly now, but if you had have asked me when I was 20 about my childhood, it would have been this big woe is me story. I was really living in that story of a scared 3-year-old child, of me not deserving things, of zero self-respect or love, and really blinded by that story. I was able to learn about the distinction between what actually happens and your story about what happens. I was 100% living in my story of what happened. So, for this example, with my dad leaving, what happened was my dad left my mum. My story about it was that I broke my family, it was my fault that he left, and that because I had destroyed my family unit, I didn't deserve this happiness, and it was my job to look after my family now. Now, there was some really beautiful power in this distinction. If a 3-year-old walked up to me today and told me how to live my life, I wouldn't listen. It sounds crazy to live a life that a 3-year-old tells you to. And yet that was exactly what I was doing. I was living my life based on a decision I made as a scared child. So now, with the distinctions of where these thought patterns came from, of being unwanted, of being unworthy, of not deserving things that I rightfully deserved as just a human being, and understanding that this was the inner workings of a child's mind, of a scared child just trying to fit in, just trying to make sense of their world, and then could take away the story and just look at it factually. It made a huge impact in my life. I feel like it gave me back the power to choose, as opposed to being as a result of my past. I could look at my past and go, okay, but who do I want to be now? For my little T, it was this quirky little moment in my life. My mum and my sister were often arguing. It was kind of normal in my household to be around screaming. And I remember one day I was sitting on the lounge floor, and I still remember I had my little, it was a tape cassette recorder, like this big, with my headphones plugged in, and I was blaring, I still remember it was Mariah Carey's Hero, and they came into the room. So they initially were in the bedrooms yelling at each other. They came into the lounge and continued yelling, and so I started singing really loudly, and realistically that was probably the whole problem, because your girl cannot hold a tune. They were interrupting my jam. I think I would have been like 6 or 7 at this stage. Simultaneously, they both turned around and yelled at me to shut up. As an emotional response, I was very much like, my opinion doesn't matter, I'm not listened to. For the most part, it was very much that I'm not listened to. So again, if we apply the story versus fact to this story, what happened was that my mum and my sister were just having an argument, and my singing was probably terrible. Realistically, I was being loud, they were trying to concentrate, they yelled at me. But my story about what happened was again that I was unworthy of being heard, that my voice actually doesn't matter, that my peace didn't matter. And so that distinction again in this particular instance was extremely helpful. I recently actually had a massive trigger in this area of my life when I was on a phone call with someone. I was not being listened to, and I straight away reverted to old patterns where I just got very angry, mildly abusive, and I ended up ending the call. And this was, as soon as I hung up, I was so shocked at my behavior, because I had already previously identified not being heard as a trigger for me. In this particular instance, years after I thought I had identified it, I clearly had still not dealt with it. And so this big old trigger happened, this big old reaction happened, And I've discussed that in another video, and it's something that I continue to work on, but I just thought it was important to share that this can be ongoing work. Even though you're aware of something, it really does take active work to ensure that you're changing those patterns and behaviors. The final thing that I found really helpful for that inner child healing was a little inner child meditation. So there's a few of these. Dr Nicole LePera has a few on her website. They have really beautiful inner child meditation, and it's basically where you sit as yourself, as you are now. Focus on a bit of breath, do whatever. Like if you find that stuff all frou-frou, then that's fine. But this practice is just super helpful, where you invite your little you. Let's say, for instance, my 3-year-old me or my 6 or 7-year-old me. I invite that little me to come and sit with me. And I just shower on that little me the things that I was lacking in those times where I made those decisions of fear. So I shower little me with love and acceptance. I shower little me with validation and praise. And you just take a moment to just make peace and just give love to those little inner parts of you. It's a really beautiful little exercise, and I've found it really healing and just really lovely. So that's all for today. If you enjoyed today's story, please like and subscribe. Thank you heaps for making it to the end of this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.